porn was one way to get noticed. I used to call it cheap special effects, you know, and
Hi, my name is Peter Kenton. I am here with the legendary artist, photographer, filmmaker, writer, Bruce LaBruce. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
My pleasure.
So, I mean, let's start off with your latest film, Saint-Narcisse, which is essentially the story of twin brothers who are separated at birth and then meet as adults and fall in love. So, tale as old as time, basically. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what drew you to this specific narrative?
You know, the new narcissism really kind of, I thought needed to be addressed, and you know, the two twins are raised, one in the city and one in a monastery, and the one in the city, Dominique, he is constantly taking Polaroids of himself, and he doesn't really know why he's so self-obsessed, and it's because he has this twin, which he finds out later. But yeah, when they meet, they look at each other as if it's in a mirror, and they end up like having sex with each other.
I mean,
I have a twin.
Obviously, twincest porn is like a bit of a phenomenon, specifically in gay porn. Was that something you were sort of commenting on in some way through this film?
Absolutely. I mean, the working title of the film was Twincest.
Okay.
Yeah, which was a hard sell at Telefilm. So we came up with the new title. Whenever I go in to pitch a movie, I always have to start out the pitch with a kind of 10-minute preamble assuring them it's not a porn movie. And then they believe me, and then we move forward. But it is kind of inspired by this subgenre of gay porn, which is, you know, it's kind of a very common thing. I mean, I did lots of research, and you know, when people who are very close family members are separated at birth when they're very young, when they are reunited in adulthood, they have a very strong romantic attachment for one another, and sometimes sexual. So it's not uncommon. And twincest is interesting because it's kind of like the most acceptable form of incest. Yeah. You know, my films are always about taboos and fetishes, but that one, I mean, most people can understand the attraction if they meet somebody face to face who looks like exactly like them, and especially if they have any narcissistic tendencies, it makes perfect sense that they're going to be attracted to each other.
And you decided to set it in 1970s Quebec. I'm just curious sort of the thinking behind that, and if that was sort of, you were inspired by something specifically to do that.
The film is kind of my homage to Quebecois cinema of the 70s, particularly Paul Almond's trilogy. Paul Almond, who is married to Geneviève Bujold, and she starred in a trilogy that he made, Isabelle, Act of the Heart, and Journey. And particularly Act of the Heart, I saw on CBC TV as a kid, and when CBC used to show like full frontal nudity, and you know, back in the 70s, and it kind of blew my mind because it's about Donald Sutherland plays a priest who meets Geneviève Bujold, who's a girl from the country, and they end up having sex on the altar of the church. And then Geneviève Bujold goes to a park and douses herself with gasoline and sets herself on fire as the credits roll. And it was made in '70, I think, and I saw it as a teenager, and I was like, oh my God, what is going on here? Like religion, sex, you know, kind of sacrifice, kind of S&M related to the church, self-abnegation, all these things with a sexual twist. I was like, is this porn or what is this?
I mean, I believe this is streaming on CBC Gem. So
it is, and we even tried to get it on you know, on the general channel, but there was a scene that I think in particular that wasn't, that was deemed not suitable. And believe it or not, it wasn't the twins having sex, it was another scene. And then it was banned for offensive content from Amazon Prime in the US and other countries, including France and Germany and Benelux. But then it was reinstated in Germany and Benelux, but not in the States, and some other countries. So that's why it's so exciting that it's on Mubi now. Mubi, because you want your film to be seen as widely as possible.
The lead actor, Félix Antoine Duval, did I get that right? Yep. So he plays both twins. You don't have, obviously, two actual twins playing them, which made me think of Dead Ringers, weirdly, because Geneviève Bujold?
Definitely a reference.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
So it must have been sort of a unique opportunity as a director to direct one person to sort of fall in love with and have sex with themselves. You want to talk a little bit about working with him in this context of sort of the scenes where he was sort of playing against himself?
We tried to make this film as, you know, we didn't use a lot of CGI. We tried to keep it as simple as possible using old techniques of split screen and body doubles. We did maybe 8 or 9 face replacement shots, CGI, and we did a live mixing on the set where I could see Felix on both sides of the screen and match his eye lines and everything. And it was very simply done, but a lot of people are shocked when they find out that it's played by the same guy.
Yeah.
So I guess we did a pretty good job.
Your first feature then came out roughly 30 years ago. And was made, correct me if I'm wrong, but something for $14,000 on the streets of Toronto, became a huge success on the film festival circuit, became a cult favorite. Kurt Cobain famously once called it his favorite film. I'm just curious, like, how you look back on that time now, because that must have just been like an incredible ride.
It was. I mean, I was, you know, making short experimental queer Super 8 films in Toronto. They were playing at these local art spaces that don't exist anymore, like YYZ and A Space and, you know, places like that. And, you know, we were reacting against the macho, you know, punk scene, so we would show these queer films and really push like the queer sex. And so I would splice like gay porn into my short experimental films and show them at punk clubs and get punched in the nose by homophobic punks. But then I decided to make a feature, so I made a feature-length Super 8 film. And it actually only cost like several $1,000s, and then my producer, Jürgen Brüning, decided to blow it up to 16. And that's a whole story, because when we blew it up to 16, I took it to a lab in Toronto, and they called the cops, and, you know, because it has explicit content. And the photo labs used to call the cops on me as well. So, but yeah, when we made it, it's sexually explicit. The skinhead was played by my boyfriend at the time, Klaus von Bucher, and we were very naive about what we were doing, you know, trying to make homemade porn sort of, but we were so shy about it that we just put like the camera on a tripod and turn it on, you know, running lock, and everyone else had to leave the room, and we would like, it was only us in front of the camera. So when it hit the festival circuit and became sort of started to become a cult classic immediately, it was quite a shock, because I never thought that it would be seen outside of these punk venues or alternative art spaces. And this is pre-internet and everything, so seeing no one was doing this, you know, putting themselves in their movies in a sexually explicit role, and it kind of like was a wild trip. Like people kind of tend to treat you a bit differently when you do porn, and they kind of think that you don't have any morals, and they can take liberties and all this stuff. So it was quite an interesting experience. And then my second feature, Super 8.5, was about the experience of making a porn film.
And you yourself were having sex in these films.
Yeah. In the first 2 films, I had explicit sex, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm curious about that. So Saint-Narcisse is not pornographic, but you do continue to make pornographic films. I know you just filmed a short that was inspired by Pasolini that was pornographic. You know,
Pasolini's Cirima almost seems like a porn film to begin with, or it has a narrative that is kind of perfect for porn, because it's like this visitor, Terence Stamp, who ends up meeting a family and then one by one kind of beds them, you know. So it's a perfect narrative for a porn, and I just kind of took it to its logical conclusion.
You know, you came up through the punk scene in Toronto, queercore, also like the sort of explosion of queer cinema that was happening in the early 90s, which just seemed like, obviously it was inspired by horrible situations that were sort of going on in the greater world, but it did seem like inspiring, that it created incredible films and launched incredible careers. What do you draw inspiration from now, and what do you think young filmmakers who are coming up can draw inspiration from? Because I do sometimes look back at that time, just even as a queer person, and think, even though obviously what was going on was bad, it did seem like a time of like collective community in the art world that we do not have.
In terms of what was the bad thing that was going on?
AIDS, for the most part.
AIDS, yeah, that was pretty
Reaganism
bad.
and fascism
Right.
and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, my mentor, Robin Wood, the great film critic, actually wrote an amazing book called Hollywood from Vietnam to Reagan, and he addressed a lot of those issues. So these days, I mean, I think it's really difficult for young filmmakers, partly because it's just such an over-determined field right now. There's just so much like that you can't even begin to wade through it. It can be a bit of a wasteland, even, like trying to find, and so trying to get noticed as a filmmaker in this kind of this crazy explosion of art and film and photography. I mean, it's just really difficult. But you know, in some ways, that's why that's one of the reasons I started doing porn. I mean, I considered it political. Like I said, I'd use it like against homophobes or tolerant liberals who would say, "Oh, it's fine to be gay as long as you don't push it in our faces or be too extreme about it." So that, of course, spurred me on to make queer pornographic films. But porn was also kind of I'm a acolyte of, and one of my mentors is John Waters, who believes in shock value, and so porn was one way to get noticed, frankly. I used to call it cheap special effects, and so, but now that doesn't get you much attention. Everyone's doing it.
Yeah,
so.
everyone is doing it. I don't think it's making them get noticed in the same kind of way.
It was a big deal, and now it's pretty common. So.
Otto was actually the first time I ever saw it at Sundance, and I believe interviewed you when I was like 22 years old. Yeah.
Nice.
I remember there just being a dinner in celebration of new queer cinema, and like you were there with like Greg Araki and Tom Kalin, and I was just like, oh my God, like this is such an incredible image. Well, I'm sure a lot of people are definitely inspired by all the work that you've done, and I just want to thank you so much for being our guest here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I love that camera.